In the summer of 1990, 10-year-old Tommy Jenkins disappeared from the Millfield County Fair in broad daylight, surrounded by hundreds of people. For 34 years, his case went cold, until a single discovery beneath a junkyard's rusted metal changed everything. What started as a missing child case became something far more sinister. A hidden network. Coded symbols carved in scrap metal. Underground chambers filled with the belongings of the lost. And at the center of it all, a small town's darkest secret finally dragged into the light. Detective Lila Morgan thought she was investigating one disappearance. She uncovered a web of horror that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Tommy's story is just one of countless cases where the truth lay buried for years, sometimes decades, before someone with enough determination refused to let it stay hidden. If stories like this grip you, if you believe that every victim deserves their truth told and every mystery deserves to be solved, then subscribe. In the summer of 1990, the small town of Millfield buzzed with its usual charm and close-knit spirit. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, Millfield was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and the annual county fair was the highlight of the year. For generations, the fair had been a cherished tradition, a day filled with laughter, games, rides, and the smell of cotton candy and popcorn wafting through the warm air. It was a day when the community came together to celebrate, to make memories, and to enjoy a break from the quiet rhythms of rural life. On that bright July afternoon, the fairgrounds were alive with the sounds of children squealing on the Ferris wheel, vendors calling out their wares, and the distant twang of a country band playing on the main stage. Among the crowds was 10-year-old Tommy Jenkins, a lively boy with tousled brown hair and a grin that rarely faded. Tommy had been looking forward to this day for weeks, counting down the days until he could ride the carousel, try his hand at the ring toss, and devour his favorite funnel cake. His mother, Susan Jenkins, had promised him a new toy if he won a prize, and Tommy was determined to make that happen. Tommy arrived at the fair early in the morning with his parents and younger sister, Sarah. The family had spent the morning wandering from booth to booth, sampling homemade pies and watching the livestock show. Tommy's energy was boundless. He darted from game to game, his laughter carrying through the air like a melody. His friends from school were scattered throughout the fairgrounds, and he made sure to stop and say hello to each one, sharing secrets and planning their next ride together. As the sun climbed higher, the fair grew busier. Families, teenagers, and elderly couples mingled along the dirt paths, while children clustered around the brightly colored tents. Tommy was last seen near the Ferris wheel, a towering structure that cast long shadows across the grounds. His friends remembered him excitedly pointing at the cabins, eager to be lifted high into the sky for a view of the entire town. But as the afternoon wore on, Tommy's enthusiasm gave way to a sudden disappearance that would shatter Millfield's peace for decades to come. By lunchtime, Susan noticed Tommy was nowhere to be found. She called out for him near the food stands and checked the rides, her heart tightening with growing unease. The bustling fairgrounds, once a place of joy, now felt overwhelming and chaotic. Despite the crowds, no one had seen where Tommy had gone. The last tangible clue was a torn piece of his jacket, discovered near the base of the Ferris wheel by a vendor setting up for the evening. It was a small, frayed fragment of blue fabric, enough to confirm that Tommy had been there, but not enough to explain his sudden absence. Panic quickly spread through the Jenkins family and the larger community. Fair organizers halted the festivities as word of the missing boy circulated. Volunteers formed search parties, scouring every corner of the fairgrounds and the surrounding woods. Local police were called in, and a coordinated effort to find Tommy began almost immediately. Flyers bearing his smiling face were distributed throughout town, and neighbors kept a vigilant watch, hoping for any sign of the boy. Despite exhaustive searches and numerous interviews, no trace of Tommy was ever found. Witnesses who had seen him playing and laughing that morning could offer no leads about where he might have gone. The torn jacket fragment remained the only physical evidence, a silent testament to the mystery that had engulfed Millfield. Days turned into weeks, and the initial hope that Tommy would be found alive slowly gave way to fear and despair. The disappearance sent ripples through the town's sense of security. Millfield, a place where doors were left unlocked and children roamed freely, was suddenly shadowed by suspicion and sorrow. Parents grew wary, watching their own children with newfound anxiety. The county fair, once a symbol of community spirit, now carried a haunting memory that no one could shake. Each year, as the anniversary of Tommy's disappearance approached, the town was reminded of the boy who vanished without a trace. Susan Jenkins, devastated and desperate for answers, often returned to the fairgrounds alone after the crowds had dispersed. She would stand near the Ferris wheel, clutching the torn jacket piece in her hand, whispering Tommy's name into the empty air. Her grief was a quiet, constant presence that weighed on the community, a reminder that one summer day had changed everything. In the years that followed, Millfield tried to move forward, but the mystery lingered like a shadow over the town. The fair continued, but with a subdued tone, as if the bright lights and cheerful music were trying to mask a wound that refused to heal. The case of Tommy Jenkins remained open, a cold file gathering dust on the sheriff's desk, while families kept their children close and whispered stories of the boy who disappeared in the middle of the happiest day of the year. The torn piece of jacket, once a trivial scrap of cloth, became a symbol of loss and unanswered questions. It was preserved carefully by the local police, the sole physical link to a boy who had been there one moment and gone the next. And as the years stretched on, the hope that Tommy might be found alive faded into a fragile memory, overshadowed by the haunting reality that some mysteries might never be solved. Yet, beneath the surface of quiet grief, the town of Millfield held onto a stubborn hope. For decades, the community waited for a break in the case, for a clue that would bring Tommy home. The disappearance had become part of the town's story, a tragic chapter that no one forgot and everyone felt compelled to remember. As the sun set on that fateful day in 1990, the county fairgrounds stood silent, the laughter and music replaced by an eerie stillness. And somewhere, in the midst of the crowds and the chaos, a boy named Tommy Jenkins vanished, leaving behind a torn piece of his jacket and a mystery that would haunt Millfield for more than 3 decades. More than 3 decades after young Tommy Jenkins vanished from the Millfield County Fair, the town's collective heart still ached with the weight of unanswered questions. Years of searching, interviews, and hopes raised and dashed had left the case cold, a haunting memory etched into the community's fabric. But in early 2024, something unexpected shattered the quiet stillness that had settled over Millfield for 34 years, a discovery that reignited the investigation and sent shockwaves through the town. It was a chilly March afternoon when Henry Caldwell, the owner of a local junkyard on the outskirts of Millfield, made the find that would bring Tommy's story back into the light. Henry had run the scrapyard for over 20 years, overseeing piles of rusted metal, broken appliances, and discarded machinery. His yard was a sprawling maze of forgotten things, a place where the past often lingered in the form of discarded memories. That day, while clearing out an old section of the lot to make room for new scrap, Henry's shovel struck something solid beneath a mound of twisted scrap metal. Curious, Henry began to clear away the debris, uncovering a hidden compartment carefully concealed beneath the rust and rubble. What he found inside chilled him to the bone. Skeletal remains wrapped in a faded, tattered blanket, along with a fragment of cloth unmistakably resembling a piece of an old jacket. The fabric's worn blue hue immediately struck a chord with Henry, a silent echo of a story he had heard many times before, the story of Tommy Jenkins. The discovery was reported to the Millfield Police Department without delay. Officers arrived at the junkyard that evening, cordoning off the area and beginning a meticulous examination of the site. The skeletal remains were carefully collected, placed into evidence bags, and transported to the State Forensic Lab for analysis. The fragment of jacket, fragile and stained by time, was preserved with equal care. News of the find spread quickly through Millfield. The community, long resigned to living with the mystery of Tommy's disappearance, was stunned. For many, the discovery brought a painful mixture of grief and hope, grief for the boy whose fate had remained unknown all these years, and hope that finally, after more than 3 decades, answers might be within reach. The case was officially reopened by local authorities, and Detective Lila Morgan was assigned to lead the investigation. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for tenacity, Morgan arrived in Millfield with the weight of expectations on her shoulders. She understood the emotional complexity of the case, not just a missing child, but a community's collective trauma that had festered in silence for too long. Initial forensic analysis confirmed what the town feared but needed to know. the remains were indeed likely those of Tommy Jenkins. The age and condition of the bones matched the timeline of the disappearance, and the jacket fragment provided a tangible link to the boy who had vanished in the summer of 1990. The confirmation reignited the investigation with a renewed urgency, but it also brought a wave of sorrow, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Detective Morgan began her work by reviewing the original case files, poring over reports, witness statements, and photographs from the frantic search so many years before. She noted the gaps and inconsistencies, the unanswered questions that had plagued the initial investigation. She reached out to the witnesses still living in Millfield, many of whom had grown older but carried vivid memories of that fateful day. Among the witnesses were Tommy's childhood friends, now adults with families of their own, who recalled the chaos and confusion of the fairgrounds as the search began. They spoke of the torn jacket piece, the frantic calls for Tommy, and the haunting silence that followed when no answers came. Their stories were tinged with the same mix of hope and despair that had defined the town's long vigil. As Morgan delved deeper, she discovered that the junkyard where the remains were found had long been a shadowy presence on the town's outskirts. It was a place where secrets could easily be buried, both literally and figuratively. Henry Caldwell, the scrapyard owner, became a key figure in the unfolding investigation, providing crucial details about the layout of the yard and the hidden compartment he had uncovered. Henry recounted how that section of the junkyard had been largely untouched for years, a forgotten corner where old vehicles and scrap had been piled high. He mentioned hearing strange noises late at night back in the early 1990s, and how some employees had spoken in hushed tones about unusual activity. These details sparked new lines of inquiry for Morgan, suggesting there might be more to the site than a simple dumping ground. The investigation expanded to include a full survey of the junkyard property, searching for other hidden spaces or evidence that might shed light on what happened to Tommy. Morgan coordinated with forensic experts to conduct ground-penetrating radar scans and detailed excavations in areas deemed suspicious. The aim was clear: to uncover any additional clues that could explain the circumstances of Tommy's disappearance and identify who was responsible. Meanwhile, the reopening of the case brought renewed media attention, drawing reporters and true crime enthusiasts eager to uncover the story behind the decades-old mystery. The Jenkins family, now older and weathered by years of grief, chose to remain private, focusing on the hope that this new chapter might finally bring closure. The community of Millfield, too, was cautious but hopeful, rallying around the investigation with a mix of sorrow and determination. Detective Morgan's approach combined meticulous police work with empathy for the community still grappling with the trauma. She held meetings with local leaders and support groups, emphasizing the importance of healing alongside justice. The discovery had reopened old wounds, but it also offered a chance to bring long-overdue answers and perhaps, in time, peace. As the forensic analysis continued, Morgan reviewed every detail with her team, looking for anything that might point to a suspect or motive. The torn jacket fragment, the bones, the hidden compartment in the junkyard, each piece was a part of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for far too long. The cold case was no longer cold. It was a living investigation, pulsing with new leads and the weight of decades-old sorrow. The discovery beneath the scrap metal had transformed the narrative of Tommy Jenkins from a missing child to a victim whose story demanded to be told. It was a grim reminder of the darkness that sometimes lurked beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities. Yet, amid the grief and shock, there was a flicker of hope that after 34 years, the truth might finally emerge from the shadows, bringing light to a town long haunted by the loss of one of its own. Detective Lila Morgan stood in the dimly lit conference room of the Millfield Police Department, the weight of the reopened case pressing heavily on her shoulders. The skeletal remains found beneath the junkyard's scrap metal had breathed new life into a tragedy that had haunted the town for over 3 decades. Now, it was up to her to piece together the fragments of a story that time had tried to bury. From the moment she stepped into Millfield, Morgan had been struck by the town's quiet resilience. The disappearance of Tommy Jenkins was more than an unsolved crime. It was a wound that had shaped generations. But Morgan was determined to bring clarity where there had only been confusion for so long. Her first order of business was to confirm the forensic findings that tied the remains to Tommy. At the state laboratory, forensic anthropologists had conducted a thorough examination of the bones. The results were definitive. The remains belonged to a male child approximately 10 years of age, matching Tommy's age at the time of his disappearance. The condition of the bones indicated they had been exposed to the elements for many years, consistent with the timeline of the case. The fragment of blue fabric found with the remains was matched to the style of jacket Tommy had worn that day, a small but critical link that strengthened the case. With this confirmation, Morgan dove into the trove of original case files, a collection of faded photographs, handwritten notes, and witness statements that painted a fragmented picture of that summer day in 1990. She pored over the documents late into the night, searching for inconsistencies that might have been overlooked or clues that had been dismissed too early. What stood out first were the witness accounts from the fairground. Many were vague, some contradictory, and a few witnesses had given conflicting descriptions of where Tommy was last seen. Morgan noted the chaotic atmosphere of the fair, crowds milling around, noise drowning out conversations, and the inevitable confusion that comes with a busy, bustling event. It was easy to see how details had been lost or distorted in the initial investigation. Determined to fill in these gaps, Morgan began tracking down surviving witnesses. Some had moved away, others had aged into reticence, but a number remained in Millfield. She interviewed them meticulously, revisiting their memories with gentle persistence. Many recalled Tommy as a lively boy, full of energy and smiling as he darted between rides and games. But when Morgan asked about his last moments, their answers grew hesitant, clouded by time and emotion. One witness, a woman named Carol Stevens, had been working at a food stand near the Ferris wheel that day. She remembered seeing Tommy playing nearby, but also noticed a man standing out of place, watching the crowd intently but not engaging with anyone. Carol's description was vague, but it suggested the presence of a suspicious figure whose role had never been fully explored. Morgan's investigation expanded to include this new lead. She reviewed the original interviews and discovered that several witnesses had mentioned a man seen loitering near the junkyard around the time of Tommy's disappearance. This detail had not been thoroughly pursued in 1990, overshadowed by the frantic search efforts and the lack of physical evidence. Back at the police station, Morgan coordinated with forensic teams to analyze the junkyard site more thoroughly. Ground-penetrating radar scans revealed hidden depressions and tunnels beneath the piles of scrap metal, evidence that the area had been used for more than just scrapping old vehicles. These concealed spaces raised troubling questions about what might have been hidden there and for how long. Morgan also examined property records and junkyard ownership history. She discovered that the yard had changed hands several times, with some owners known for less than reputable dealings. This history suggested that the junkyard could have been a cover for illicit activities, potentially including the disposal of evidence related to Tommy's case. Interviews with former junkyard employees revealed whispers of strange occurrences in the early 1990s, unexplained noises, late-night visitors, and secretive behavior that had been shrugged off at the time but now seemed ominous. These testimonies opened new avenues for investigation, prompting Morgan to look deeper into the people connected to the junkyard during that period. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued to analyze the skeletal remains for signs of trauma or foul play. The preliminary findings indicated that Tommy had likely been deceased for years before being concealed beneath the scrap metal. There was no immediate evidence of cause of death, but subtle marks on the bones suggested possible violence. The details were painstakingly documented, with each finding adding weight to the theory that Tommy had been abducted and murdered. Morgan's work was painstaking and methodical. She understood that decades of silence and fear had buried more than just evidence. They had buried the truth. But with each new discovery, she felt closer to unraveling the mystery that had gripped Millfield for so long. As she gathered the pieces, Morgan also reached out to the Jenkins family. Susan Jenkins, now older and frail, expressed cautious hope that the renewed investigation might bring answers. Morgan kept lines of communication open, recognizing the importance of empathy alongside forensic rigor. The family's pain was a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Community reactions were mixed. Some residents welcomed the fresh attention, eager for justice and closure. Others were wary, fearful of reopening old wounds or stirring up painful memories. Morgan held public forums to address concerns, emphasizing transparency and the pursuit of truth for Tommy in the entire town. The detective's persistence uncovered a growing pattern of suspicious activity around the junkyard and fairgrounds. Morgan began to suspect that Tommy's case might be linked to a broader network of disappearances in neighboring counties. This possibility added urgency to her work, as she sought to connect dots that had remained invisible for years. As the investigation progressed, Morgan assembled a timeline, reconstructing Tommy's last known movements with as much precision as possible. She mapped witness sightings, the location of the torn jacket fragment, and the proximity of the junkyard to the fairgrounds. This spatial analysis suggested that Tommy had been taken quickly and transported to the junkyard site, a grim realization that deepened the mystery. Detective Morgan also coordinated with digital forensics experts to comb through old and new records, searching for any communications, transactions, or patterns that might reveal suspects. The task was daunting, but Morgan's determination never wavered. Every lead, every fragment of evidence, brought her closer to the truth, a truth that had been buried beneath years of silence and sorrow. The case of Tommy Jenkins was no longer just a cold file on a shelf. It was a living investigation, fueled by the unwavering resolve of a detective who refused to let a child's story be forgotten. In the quiet moments between interviews and evidence reviews, Morgan often found herself standing alone near the fairgrounds, imagining the boy who had vanished so long ago. She saw his bright eyes, heard his laughter, and felt the urgency of her mission, to bring light to a darkness that had lingered far too long, and to give the town of Millfield the answers it desperately sought. The summer of 1990 was etched vividly in the memories of Millfield's residents, a day that began with joy and ended in inexplicable loss. Detective Lila Morgan found herself drawn into that summer afternoon as she sifted through eyewitness accounts, old photographs, and faded newspaper clippings. To truly understand Tommy Jenkins' disappearance, she needed to step back in time, to reconstruct the moments before the boy vanished, to walk the fairgrounds as they had been, and to hear the echoes of laughter mingled with the hum of activity. July 14, 1990, dawned clear and warm, a perfect day for the annual county fair that had been a staple of Millfield life for generations. Families arrived early, setting up picnic blankets and eager children clutching tickets for rides and games. The fairgrounds were a kaleidoscope of colors, striped tents, bright banners fluttering in the breeze, and the gleaming metal of the Ferris wheel towering above the crowd. The scent of fried dough and caramel apples filled the air, mingling with the sounds of a country band playing on the main stage. Tommy Jenkins was a boy full of excitement that day. His mother, Susan, recalled how he bounded from one attraction to another, a whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm. He wanted to ride every ride, win every prize, and sample every treat. His favorite was the Ferris wheel, which promised a breathtaking view of the town's rolling hills and patchwork fields. Tommy's friends from school were scattered across the fairgrounds, their laughter and shouts blending with the general bustle. As the morning wore on, the fair became increasingly crowded. Vendors called out to passers-by, children darted between booths, and the sounds of games, ping-pong balls bouncing, darts popping balloons, created a lively cacophony. In the midst of the excitement, however, there was an undercurrent of chaos that would later complicate the search for Tommy. The fair's sprawling layout, combined with the sheer number of visitors, made it difficult to keep track of children, especially those like Tommy who moved quickly and eagerly from one area to the next. Witnesses described Tommy's last known moments near the Ferris wheel. He had been laughing with friends, pointing up at the cabins that slowly revolved against the blue sky. It was a scene of carefree innocence, the kind of moment that makes a disappearance all the more haunting. No one saw anything unusual at the time, no warning signs that would hint at the tragedy to come. When Tommy failed to return for lunch, his mother's concern grew rapidly. Susan Jenkins retraced his steps, calling his name near the food stands, the game booths, and the ride entrances. But amidst the noise and movement, the boy was nowhere to be found. The torn piece of blue jacket discovered near the Ferris wheel was the only physical clue, a small fragment that seemed to whisper a silent plea for answers. The initial search was frantic and disorganized. Volunteers combed the fairgrounds, police officers questioned attendees, and neighbors spread out into the surrounding woods and fields. But the chaos of the fair, the crowds, the noise, the distractions worked against them. Eyewitnesses offered conflicting accounts, memories blurred by the passage of time and the overwhelming atmosphere. The sprawling nature of the fairgrounds, with its winding paths and hidden corners, made it easy for a child to slip away unnoticed. The community's grief deepened as days passed without any sign of Tommy. The fair, once a symbol of joy and togetherness, became a place marked by fear and sorrow. Annual celebrations were shadowed by the memory of the boy who had vanished in the midst of laughter and light. Parents clutched their children tighter, and the town's sense of innocence was forever altered. For Detective Morgan, understanding the chaotic environment of that day was crucial. She walked the fairgrounds herself, noting how easy it would have been for a child to wander off or be taken unnoticed. The layout, with its dense crowds, narrow paths, and numerous hiding spots, offered both opportunity and concealment. She spoke with longtime residents who shared stories of the fair's atmosphere, the ebb and flow of visitors, and the challenges of supervising children in such a setting. Morgan also studied the logistical challenges faced by the initial search teams. Communication was limited, records were incomplete, and the sheer scale of the event meant that critical early moments were lost in confusion. These factors, she realized, had allowed the trail to grow cold long before the discovery in the junkyard. The community's lingering grief was palpable. At local gatherings, the name Tommy Jenkins was spoken with a mixture of sorrow and reverence. Those who had known him as a child carried the pain of his absence, while others mourned the loss of safety and trust that his disappearance had shattered. The annual remembrance ceremonies, though small, were a testament to the town's unwillingness to forget. Morgan met with Tommy's family, listening to their stories of hope and heartbreak. Susan Jenkins shared memories of her son's boundless curiosity and infectious laughter, while also expressing the torment of decades spent without answers. These personal accounts fueled Morgan's determination to bring clarity to the case and honor the boy's memory. As she pieced together the events of that day, Morgan gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities that had hindered the original investigation. The chaotic atmosphere of the fair, the limitations of technology and resources at the time, and the natural fading of human memory all contributed to the enduring mystery. Yet, within the chaos, Morgan detected faint threads of hope. The discovery in the junkyard had reopened the door to truth, providing a tangible connection to the boy who had vanished so long ago. With modern forensic techniques and renewed community support, she believed that the story of Tommy Jenkins could finally be told in full. Standing once again near the Ferris wheel, Morgan imagined the boy's last moments, the excitement in his eyes, the thrill of the ride, the simple joy of a summer day. She felt the urgency of her mission intensify, knowing that the answers lay somewhere within the tangled memories and silent shadows of that fairground. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering what had happened. It was about restoring hope to a town that had lived too long in the shadow of uncertainty. As the sun dipped low over Millfield, casting long shadows across the fairgrounds, Morgan vowed to see this case through, to give Tommy Jenkins and his family the justice and closure they deserved. Detective Lila Morgan sat at her desk, the soft glow of her computer screen illuminating a cluttered space filled with case files, notes, and photographs. The reopened investigation into Tommy Jenkins' disappearance had already uncovered the grim discovery at the junkyard, but Morgan knew the path ahead required a careful re-examination of every detail, especially the witness statements from that chaotic day in 1990. It was in the inconsistencies and gaps that she hoped to find the threads that would unravel the mystery. As Morgan reviewed the original interviews, a pattern began to emerge. Several witnesses' accounts conflicted over seemingly minor details: the exact time they saw Tommy, his movements around the Ferris wheel, and the presence of certain individuals near the junkyard. Some statements described a man lingering near the fairgrounds who did not fit with the descriptions of anyone known to the community. Others mentioned hearing odd noises or seeing unusual activity near the junkyard, but those reports had been dismissed or overlooked at the time. Morgan's instincts told her these discrepancies were not accidental. They hinted at deeper, unspoken truths, memories clouded by fear, confusion, or perhaps intentional silence. She decided to re-interview key witnesses, approaching them with sensitivity but also a determination to pierce through decades of uncertainty. Her first meeting was with Carol Stevens, the vendor who had spotted the unfamiliar man near the Ferris wheel. Carol was hesitant at first, her voice trembling as she recounted the day. She described the man as tall, with a heavy coat despite the warm weather, and eyes that seemed to scan the crowd with unsettling focus. Carol admitted she had never reported him to the police back then, unsure if her concerns were valid or simply paranoia amidst a busy event. As Morgan pressed gently, Carol revealed that she had noticed the man several times throughout the day, always watching but never interacting. She had felt uneasy but had been too afraid to speak out, worried about being dismissed or attracting unwanted attention. Her revelation was a crucial piece of the puzzle, a suspicious figure who had gone unnoticed by most but might hold the key to Tommy's disappearance. Morgan's investigation into this man's identity led her to old police records and community archives. She found references to a transient individual known to frequent the area in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a man with a history of minor offenses but no direct link to serious crimes. The trail was cold, but Morgan sensed this figure's presence near the fairgrounds was no coincidence. Beyond this, Morgan uncovered reports of illicit activities around the junkyard itself. Locals had whispered for years about strange comings and goings, late-night meetings, and unexplained noises emanating from the scrapyard. Former employees, now retired or relocated, spoke of a secretive atmosphere that had unsettled them. Some mentioned equipment being moved at odd hours, while others recalled overhearing conversations about making things disappear. Despite these rumors, the junkyard had remained largely uninvestigated until the recent discovery. Morgan realized that the site had served as more than just a scrap repository. It might have been a hub for illegal dealings, a place where evidence and secrets could be buried without fear of discovery. Digging deeper, Morgan examined property records and business permits, searching for anomalies or signs of tampering. She uncovered gaps in ownership documentation and suspicious transactions that suggested deliberate concealment. It became clear that someone had gone to great lengths to obscure the junkyard's history, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued their work at the junkyard, carefully combing through the debris for additional clues. Ground-penetrating radar scans revealed hidden compartments and tunnels beneath the scrap piles, confirming suspicions that the site had been used for covert purposes. Items linked to other missing persons were discovered, suggesting a sinister pattern that extended beyond Tommy Jenkins. Morgan coordinated with other law enforcement agencies to compare notes and search for connections to unsolved disappearances in neighboring counties. The emerging pattern hinted at a possible abduction ring operating under the cover of local events like fairs and festivals, exploiting the chaos and crowds to conceal their crimes. As new evidence surfaced, Morgan's team uncovered coded messages and symbols carved into scrap metal and wooden pallets scattered throughout the junkyard. These cryptic markings suggested a level of organization and ritual that was deeply disturbing. Morgan consulted with experts in criminal psychology and cult behavior, trying to decipher the meaning behind the symbols and their possible relation to the victims. The investigation also took a personal toll on Morgan. She felt the weight of the community's pain and the urgency of bringing justice to families who had waited decades for answers. She met regularly with support groups and local leaders, fostering open dialogue and encouraging residents to share any information that might help. During a late-night review of the case files, Morgan noticed inconsistencies in the timelines provided by several witnesses. Some had reported seeing Tommy near the Ferris wheel at different times, while others mentioned hearing a loud noise coming from the junkyard around the same period. These overlapping but conflicting accounts suggested that critical events had occurred unnoticed amid the day's bustle. Morgan hypothesized that Tommy had been abducted swiftly and hidden in the junkyard before anyone could react. The torn jacket piece found near the Ferris wheel might have been dropped during a struggle or hurried escape. She theorized that the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the fairgrounds and the junkyard, using that advantage to evade detection. To test this theory, Morgan organized a detailed reconstruction of the fairgrounds as they had been in 1990, enlisting volunteers and using archival footage and photographs. The simulation helped identify blind spots and escape routes that could have facilitated the abduction. It also highlighted how the perpetrator could have moved unnoticed, blending into the crowd and exploiting the confusion of the festival atmosphere. Morgan's persistence paid off when a former junkyard employee came forward with a startling confession. The man admitted to witnessing suspicious behavior in the early 1990s, late-night visitors bringing unmarked packages, conversations about making things disappear, and an atmosphere of fear among workers who dared not ask questions. He revealed that he had once found what appeared to be personal belongings of missing children hidden beneath the scrap metal but had been too scared to report it. This testimony reinforced the theory that the junkyard was a dumping ground for victims and evidence, controlled by individuals who operated with impunity. Morgan realized the investigation was moving beyond a single disappearance into the heart of a larger, darker network. As the pieces fell into place, Morgan intensified efforts to identify suspects tied to the junkyard and the suspicious figures seen at the fairgrounds. She coordinated surveillance, background checks, and interviews, determined to unravel the web of secrecy that had allowed these crimes to remain hidden for so long. The community watched with a mix of hope and apprehension as the investigation gained momentum. Families who had lived in fear for decades dared to believe that justice might finally be within reach. Morgan, too, felt the weight of the moment, knowing that every new lead brought them closer to exposing the truth and ensuring that the victims, including Tommy Jenkins, would not be forgotten. Detective Lila Morgan's investigation into the junkyard's dark past revealed a chilling truth. The scrapyard was far more than a simple business. It had operated as a front for illegal dealings, a shadowy hub where secrets were buried alongside rusted metal and broken machinery. The discovery of Tommy Jenkins' remains had shattered the fragile peace in Millfield, but it also opened the door to uncovering a sinister network that had thrived under the town's nose for years. Morgan's team delved into the junkyard's operational history, interviewing former employees, contractors, and local residents who had interacted with the site during the early 1990s. Many described an atmosphere thick with secrecy and unease. Workers spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises echoing through the yard late at night, sudden blackouts of power, and a pervasive sense that something was being hidden beneath the surface. One former employee, a man named Carl Reynolds, recalled how he had stumbled upon a locked gate leading to a fenced-off area deep within the junkyard. The gate was rarely opened, and those who had access were tight-lipped and wary of outsiders. Carl described hearing muffled voices and the faint sound of movement behind the gate during late-night shifts, but fear and a strict code of silence kept him from investigating further. Morgan's team obtained warrants to search the junkyard thoroughly, coordinating with forensic experts and excavation crews. As they began to peel back layers of debris, they uncovered hidden compartments and underground storage spaces ingeniously concealed beneath piles of scrap metal. These clandestine areas appeared designed to evade detection, with reinforced walls and camouflaged entrances. Inside one such compartment, investigators discovered personal belongings, children's toys, worn clothing, and faded photographs, items that bore a haunting resemblance to those reported missing alongside Tommy Jenkins. The grim collection suggested that the junkyard had been used as a dumping ground for victims, a place where abducted children were concealed and discarded with callous disregard. Interviews with local law enforcement officers who had worked during the original investigation painted a disturbing picture of obstruction and oversight. Some admitted that the junkyard's suspicious activities had been known but never thoroughly pursued, due in part to limited resources and a reluctance to confront powerful local figures connected to the property. Morgan uncovered evidence that the junkyard's ownership had ties to individuals involved in illicit trades, including stolen goods, drug trafficking, and possibly human trafficking. These connections provided a motive for the secrecy and the extreme measures taken to hide evidence. The scrapyard was not just a business, it was a nexus of criminal enterprise. Former employees spoke of irregular deliveries arriving at odd hours, often without proper documentation. Trucks would unload scrap, but some loads contained items that raised alarms, sealed crates, unmarked packages, and even cages. These details were corroborated by shipping records that showed inconsistencies and gaps, suggesting deliberate falsification. Morgan's team also found signs that the property's records had been tampered with. Deeds and permits contained alterations, and some documents were missing entirely. This pointed to a concerted effort to obscure the junkyard's true nature and ownership history, shielding the criminal activities from public scrutiny. The investigation revealed that the junkyard had been a hub for more than just physical concealment. It appeared to be part of an organized network that exploited local festivals and fairs, like the Millfield County Fair, as cover for abductions and illicit transactions. The chaos and crowds provided the perfect backdrop for predators to operate undetected. Morgan interviewed community members who recalled rumors and stories passed down over the years, whispers of children disappearing after attending fairs, strange vehicles seen in the night, and adults who suddenly vanished without explanation. While these accounts had been dismissed as folklore, the emerging evidence gave them new, chilling credibility. Former junkyard workers described an unspoken fear that permeated the yard, an understanding that questioning or probing too deeply could lead to severe consequences. One woman, who wished to remain anonymous, recounted being warned not to speak about what she had seen, fearing retaliation. Her testimony underscored the culture of silence that had allowed the crimes to persist. Forensic experts continued their painstaking work, cataloging evidence and searching for DNA and other trace materials that might identify additional victims or suspects. The scope of the investigation expanded rapidly, encompassing other missing person cases from neighboring counties that bore similarities to Tommy's disappearance. Morgan coordinated with state and federal agencies to share information and pool resources. The network they uncovered appeared to span multiple jurisdictions, with the junkyard serving as a critical node in a broader scheme of abduction and trafficking. The investigation also uncovered disturbing symbols and coded messages carved into scrap materials scattered throughout the junkyard. These markings suggested the presence of a clandestine group or cult operating within the criminal network, employing rituals or codes to communicate and coordinate their activities. Specialists in criminal psychology and cult behavior were brought in to analyze these findings. As the investigation intensified, Morgan faced resistance from those seeking to protect the junkyard's legacy and its owners. Legal battles over property rights and access delayed some searches, while community members expressed fear and uncertainty about the revelations coming to light. Despite these challenges, Morgan remained resolute. She held regular briefings with local authorities and community leaders to maintain transparency and build trust. Public forums allowed residents to voice concerns and share information, fostering a spirit of collective determination to confront the darkness that had long lurked in their midst. In the quiet moments between raids and interviews, Morgan reflected on the depth of deception and cruelty that had been hidden beneath the surface of Millfield's peaceful facade. The junkyard, once a symbol of industry and renewal, had become a tomb for lost children and shattered lives. Yet, amidst the darkness, Morgan found strength in the courage of those who came forward, the whistleblowers, the witnesses, and the families seeking justice. Their voices broke the silence, piercing the veil of fear and secrecy. The excavation of the junkyard continued, uncovering more evidence that deepened the understanding of the crimes committed there. Each discovery brought the investigation closer to exposing those responsible and dismantling the network that had operated unchecked for so long. With every painstaking step, Morgan moved closer to unraveling the full scope of the horrors concealed in the scrapyard shadows. The journey was far from over, but the truth was emerging. A truth that would demand accountability, justice, and healing for Millfield and all those affected by the darkness that had once thrived in its midst. Detective Lila Morgan's investigation had taken a harrowing turn. What began as a search for a missing boy in Millfield had unfolded into a sprawling nightmare of dark secrets and hidden horrors, rooted deep within the town's outskirts. As new evidence emerged, a disturbing pattern began to coalesce, one that connected Tommy Jenkins' disappearance to a series of unresolved abductions in neighboring counties. The threads of a sinister network stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. Morgan pored over cold case files from surrounding jurisdictions, searching for similarities in the missing persons reports. She found unsettling parallels: children and teenagers vanishing during local festivals, fairs, and crowded public events, moments when the chaos and distraction created perfect opportunities for abduction. The victims shared disturbing commonalities. Many had been last seen at events similar to Millfield's county fair, and in several cases, their disappearances had been accompanied by cryptic symbols or coded messages left behind. These coded messages had first been discovered carved into scrap materials scattered throughout the Millfield junkyard, cryptic symbols etched into rusted metal, wooden pallets, and even the walls of hidden compartments. Morgan consulted with experts in cryptography and criminal symbolism, hoping to decipher their meaning. The pattern suggested a ritualistic or organizational code, possibly used by a coordinated group to mark their territory or communicate instructions. The more Morgan delved into these symbols, the clearer it became that they represented more than mere graffiti. The carvings matched symbols found in other junkyards and abandoned sites linked to missing persons in neighboring states. This revelation pointed toward a network of abduction rings, operating under the cloak of local festivities and community gatherings, exploiting the very events that were meant to bring joy and unity. Morgan's team cross-referenced the symbols with known gang and cult insignias but found no direct matches. Instead, the codes appeared to be a localized language, developed to obscure communication from outsiders and law enforcement. This suggested a sophisticated and secretive operation, one that had evolved over years, possibly decades. Interviews with former junkyard employees and local residents reinforced the theory of an organized ring. Several individuals recalled seeing unfamiliar vehicles and strangers who never fully blended into the community. These outsiders seemed to arrive during festival seasons and disappear just as quickly, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. Morgan's investigation expanded to include these transient figures. She traced vehicle registrations, checked hotel records, and reviewed surveillance footage from surrounding areas. Though many leads were dead ends, a few pointed toward individuals with disturbing criminal histories, suspects with connections to kidnapping, trafficking, and violent crimes. The discovery of multiple personal belongings belonging to missing children in the Millfield Junkyard deepened the urgency. Each item was a silent testament to lives stolen and stories left unfinished. Morgan's team cataloged these artifacts meticulously, hoping that forensic analysis might reveal DNA or other clues to identify the victims and their captors. As the investigation unfolded, Morgan uncovered evidence that the abduction ring used local festivals and fairs as strategic cover. The noise, crowds, and general confusion created windows of opportunity for perpetrators to snatch children with minimal risk of immediate detection. The kidnappings appeared carefully planned, exploiting the chaos rather than random acts of violence. Morgan's team analyzed the timing of disappearances, overlaying them with festival calendars across multiple counties. The pattern was striking, a surge of abductions coinciding with major local celebrations. This strategic timing demonstrated the perpetrators' deep understanding of community rhythms and law enforcement limitations. The coded messages carved into scrap materials were likely a way for the ring to mark successful operations or to communicate warnings to members. Morgan theorized that the symbols served as territorial markers, signaling areas controlled by the group or indicating where victims had been hidden or disposed of. To better understand the network structure, Morgan enlisted the help of criminal profilers and experts in organized crime. Their analyses suggested a decentralized but tightly coordinated group, with cells operating semi-independently but bound by shared rituals and codes. The cult-like symbolism hinted at a belief system or ideology that motivated the perpetrators beyond mere criminal gain. Morgan's team began mapping the locations of known disappearances, coded symbols, and junkyard sites linked to the network. The geographic spread was alarming, covering multiple states and crossing jurisdictional boundaries. This realization prompted coordination with federal agencies to unify resources and share intelligence. Community outreach became a critical component of the investigation. Morgan held meetings with families of missing children, support groups, and local leaders, providing updates and soliciting information. These sessions uncovered new witnesses and tips, some revealing sightings of suspicious individuals or vehicles during past festivals. One breakthrough came when a former member of the ring, seeking to escape the organization, contacted authorities anonymously. This individual described the inner workings of the group, the recruitment methods, initiation rituals involving the coded symbols, and the use of junkyards as dumping grounds and meeting points. Their testimony provided invaluable insight into the network's operations and hierarchy. Morgan's team used this information to identify key suspects and plan strategic interventions. Surveillance was increased around festival sites and junkyard locations during peak event seasons. Undercover officers and informants were deployed to infiltrate suspected cells. Despite progress, Morgan faced significant challenges. The ring's members were adept at evading detection, using false identities and exploiting legal loopholes. Community fear and mistrust complicated efforts, as some residents were reluctant to cooperate, either out of fear or suspicion. The investigation also revealed instances of law enforcement corruption and negligence that had allowed the ring to operate with impunity. Morgan confronted these obstacles head-on, advocating for transparency and accountability within the agencies involved. As the net tightened, arrests were made in neighboring counties, disrupting parts of the network. Yet Morgan knew the fight was far from over. The symbols carved into scrap materials remained a chilling reminder of the network's reach and resilience. Each new piece of evidence brought Morgan closer to understanding the full scope of a dark web that had preyed on communities under the guise of celebration and festivity. The coded messages, the carefully timed abductions, and the hidden connections painted a picture of calculated cruelty and systematic terror. For Morgan, the mission was clear: to dismantle the network, bring perpetrators to justice, and restore safety to the communities that had suffered for far too long. The investigation was no longer just about Tommy Jenkins. It was about stopping a cycle of violence that had claimed countless innocent lives. As she prepared for the next phase of the operation, Morgan felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. But she also felt a renewed determination, fueled by the hope that, through relentless pursuit of the truth, the darkness could be brought into the light. Detective Lila Morgan's investigation into the dark network behind Tommy Jenkins' disappearance had reached a critical turning point. After months of meticulous work, following leads across counties and piecing together fragments of a sprawling criminal web, the focus had narrowed to one elusive figure, the former manager of the Millfield Junkyard, a man named Richard Hale. Known for his reclusive nature and deep ties to the scrapyard's shadowy operations in the early 1990s, Hale had long been a person of interest but had evaded serious scrutiny until now. Morgan and her team tracked Hale to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods outside Millfield. The area was rugged and isolated, a place where someone could disappear from sight without leaving a trace. The detective approached cautiously, aware that Hale's reputation suggested he would not surrender easily. The cabin was surrounded by dense trees, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and distant bird calls. After coordinating with tactical units, Morgan initiated contact. Hale was reluctant to engage but eventually agreed to a tense, guarded interview. Inside the dim cabin, walls lined with weathered maps and cryptic notes, Hale's demeanor was defensive yet calculated. The interrogation was a delicate dance, with Morgan probing for information while navigating the suspect's evasive tactics. As the conversation unfolded, Hale made chilling admissions. He acknowledged managing the junkyard during the time Tommy vanished and admitted knowledge of unusual activities on the property. He described how certain areas of the yard were off-limits to most employees, reserved for special deliveries and private matters. Hale's words confirmed suspicions that the junkyard was more than a scrapyard. It was a site of covert and criminal operations. Hale revealed that he had witnessed unmarked vehicles arriving late at night, carrying cargo that was never logged or accounted for. He spoke of a network of individuals who used the junkyard as a dumping ground for evidence and victims. His tone shifted when he mentioned the coded symbols carved into scrap materials, referring to them as signs used by the group to communicate and mark their territory. Despite his admissions, Hale maintained a veil of secrecy about the identities of others involved. He hinted at powerful figures within the community and beyond, suggesting a hierarchy that extended far beyond Millfield. The network was organized, with layers of protection shielding its leaders from exposure. Morgan pressed Hale for details about Tommy Jenkins's fate. Hale's response was chillingly cryptic. He refused to disclose specifics but implied that the boy had been part of a larger plan, orchestrated by the group. His words hinted at ritualistic motives intertwined with criminal intent, deepening the darkness surrounding the case. Sensing an opportunity, Morgan offered Hale leniency in exchange for cooperation. The suspect wavered but remained cautious, wary of betraying associates or incriminating himself beyond the immediate charges. However, under pressure, Hale eventually agreed to lead investigators to hidden evidence that could break the case wide open. Guided by Hale, Morgan's team returned to the junkyard for a thorough search of areas previously inaccessible. Hale directed them to a concealed underground storage facility, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers buried beneath decades of scrap metal. The space was cold and claustrophobic, filled with remnants of lives stolen and secrets buried. Inside the facility, authorities uncovered a trove of personal belongings, clothing, toys, photographs, and other items belonging to missing children. The discovery was a grim confirmation of the network's horrific activities and provided tangible links to multiple unsolved disappearances beyond Tommy Jenkins. Among the evidence were journals and documents hinting at the group's operations, including coded schedules, lists of victims, and financial records. These materials offered crucial insights into the organization's structure and the extent of their crimes. Forensic teams meticulously collected and analyzed the artifacts, hoping to identify victims and trace connections to suspects. The excavation also revealed physical structures suggesting the use of the facility for confinement and control. Makeshift cells and restraint devices indicated that victims had been held captive on-site, subjected to unimaginable horrors. The evidence painted a harrowing picture of cruelty and calculated violence. Morgan's interrogation of Hale continued as investigators processed the new findings. Under continued questioning, Hale disclosed names of other individuals involved, including those who had managed the junkyard after his tenure. He described a system of intimidation and control that had silenced witnesses and coerced compliance. Authorities acted swiftly on Hale's information, conducting raids and arrests targeting key figures within the network. The operation disrupted the organization's operations and brought some perpetrators to justice. However, Morgan knew that many questions remained unanswered, and the full extent of the network's influence was still being uncovered. Throughout the process, Morgan remained mindful of the emotional toll on the families of victims. She worked closely with support services to provide care and information, emphasizing the importance of transparency and sensitivity. The community's response was a mixture of relief, grief, and cautious hope. The revelation of the underground storage facility sent shockwaves through Millfield and neighboring communities. The discovery shattered long-held assumptions about safety and trust, exposing a darkness that had been hidden in plain sight. Morgan's relentless pursuit of the truth had pierced the veil of silence that had protected the criminals for decades. Yet, even as arrests were made and evidence collected, the investigation faced challenges. Legal battles over the admissibility of evidence, procedural delays, and attempts by some defendants to obstruct justice tested the resolve of the law enforcement team. Morgan remained steadfast, determined to see the case through despite these obstacles. In the days following the breakthrough, Morgan reflected on the journey from a missing boy at a county fair to the uncovering of a vast criminal network operating beneath the surface of a quiet town. The path had been fraught with danger and despair, but the discovery of the underground facility marked a turning point, offering hope for justice and closure. As the investigation progressed, Morgan prepared for the next phase, piecing together the lives of the victims, understanding the network's full scope, and ensuring that those responsible would be held accountable. The fight was far from over, but the tide had begun to turn. Standing outside the junkyard at dusk, Morgan looked toward the horizon, aware that the shadows that had long concealed the truth were finally receding. The case of Tommy Jenkins had reopened a wound, but it also ignited a flame of determination to protect the innocent and confront the darkness wherever it hid. The arrest of Richard Hale and several key members of the network marked a watershed moment in the decades-long investigation into the disappearance of Tommy Jenkins and the terrible crimes surrounding the Millfield junkyard. Yet, for Detective Lila Morgan, the arrests were only the beginning of a long and arduous journey toward justice and healing for a community that had suffered in silence for far too long. Court proceedings began swiftly, drawing intense media attention and public scrutiny. The trial was a complex and emotionally charged affair, unfolding in a packed courtroom where families of victims sat side by side, their faces marked by grief, hope, and the weariness of years spent waiting for answers. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: forensic findings from the underground storage facility, personal belongings recovered from the junkyard, and the damning testimony of Richard Hale himself. Witnesses recounted chilling details of the network's operations, describing how children had been abducted during local fairs and festivals, trafficked through a web of criminal connections, and ultimately concealed in the grim confines of the junkyard's secret chambers. The coded symbols carved into scrap materials were explained as part of the group's ritualistic communication, a terrifying language of control and domination. The defense attempted to sow doubt, questioning the reliability of decades-old evidence and the credibility of witnesses fearful of retaliation. Yet the overwhelming weight of physical evidence and Hale's own admissions made their arguments difficult to sustain. Morgan watched closely as the courtroom drama unfolded, aware that justice required not only conviction but also acknowledgement of the victim's humanity. Outside the courthouse, the community grappled with a mixture of emotions. Relief mingled with sorrow as the truth emerged, exposing wounds that many had tried to bury. Local leaders organized forums and support groups to help residents process the trauma and begin the difficult work of healing. The case had torn at the fabric of Millfield, but also united its people in a shared commitment to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. Morgan remained deeply involved, not only in the legal aspects but also in supporting the families impacted by the case. She coordinated with victim advocates, counselors, and social workers to provide resources and a compassionate ear. The detective understood that closure was a process, not a moment, and that healing required time, patience, and community strength. As the trial progressed, additional arrests were made. Investigations into related cases in neighboring counties uncovered more suspects linked to the abduction network, expanding the scope of justice beyond Millfield. Morgan coordinated with federal agencies to ensure that the broader criminal enterprise was dismantled and its members held accountable. The courtroom became a stage for confronting decades of pain and betrayal. Victims' families delivered heartfelt statements, honoring lost loved ones and demanding recognition of their suffering. Their voices echoed through the halls, a powerful testament to resilience and the human spirit's capacity to endure. Morgan reflected on the emotional toll of the case, not just on the families but on herself and her team. The relentless pursuit of darkness exacted a price, but it also reaffirmed their commitment to justice. She found solace in small victories, a confession, a piece of evidence, a supportive conversation with a grieving parent. Community initiatives sprang up in the aftermath, aimed at education, prevention, and awareness. The Millfield County Fair, once overshadowed by tragedy, implemented new safety protocols and outreach programs to protect children and families. Schools incorporated lessons on personal safety, and local law enforcement increased their presence during public events. The Jenkins family, while still mourning, expressed gratitude for the renewed investigation and the dedication of those who refused to let the case fade into obscurity. Susan Jenkins spoke publicly about her hope that Tommy's story would serve as a catalyst for change, ensuring that no other child would suffer as he had. Throughout the trial, Morgan remained vigilant, aware that justice was not guaranteed by verdicts alone. She continued to advocate for systemic reforms and better coordination among agencies to identify and protect vulnerable populations. The case had exposed gaps and failures, but also opportunities for progress. In quiet moments, Morgan visited the Junkyard site, now secured and under preservation orders. The once-forgotten grounds had become a somber testament to lives lost and the consequences of silence. She walked among the rusted debris, imagining the children whose stories had been buried but were now being told. As the trial drew to a close, the jury deliberated for days. The community held its breath, knowing that the verdict would resonate far beyond the courtroom. When the decision was finally announced, convictions on multiple counts of kidnapping, trafficking, and murder, it brought a measure of relief but also the stark reality of loss. Morgan attended the sentencing, witnessing the moment when justice was formally served. The courtroom was heavy with emotion, a mixture of closure and the recognition that the scars left by these crimes would endure. The detective felt a profound sense of responsibility and humility, knowing that her work had helped to give voice to the voiceless. In the aftermath, Morgan continued to engage with the community, supporting efforts to remember the victims and educate future generations. Memorial services were held, and plans were made to transform the Junkyard site into a place of remembrance and reflection. The case of Tommy Jenkins had begun as a single missing child story, but had unfolded into a complex tapestry of darkness and resilience. For Morgan, the journey underscored the importance of perseverance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As she prepared to close the chapter on the investigation, Morgan felt a deep sense of fulfillment tempered by the knowledge that the fight against such evil was ongoing. The healing process was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for justice, for remembrance, and for hope. Years after the harrowing revelations and trials that shook Millfield to its core, the town began to reclaim its sense of peace and community. The scars left by the disappearance of Tommy Jenkins and the dark network uncovered beneath the Junkyard lingered, but the resilience of the people shone through in their determination to remember, heal, and protect future generations. At the heart of this renewal stood a newly established memorial near the fairgrounds, an open field transformed into a quiet sanctuary of remembrance. Here, the names of Tommy and the other victims were etched into stone, surrounded by wildflowers and gentle pathways for reflection. The memorial was a collective effort, a place where families, friends, and neighbors could gather to honor those lost and to find solace together. The annual Millfield County Fair, once overshadowed by fear and grief, had been reborn as a symbol of hope and vigilance. Organizers implemented rigorous safety measures, including increased security, designated child-safe zones, and volunteer programs dedicated to keeping children safe during the festivities. Educational campaigns ran alongside the carnival rides, teaching families about personal safety and the importance of community awareness. Detective Lila Morgan had become a respected figure in the town, not only for her relentless pursuit of justice but for her compassion and commitment to healing. Though the case of Tommy Jenkins had closed, Morgan remained deeply involved in local initiatives aimed at preventing similar tragedies. She frequently spoke at schools and community centers, sharing lessons learned and emphasizing the power of vigilance and solidarity. Morgan's final visit to the Junkyard site, now fenced off and preserved as a historical reminder, was charged with emotion. Once a place of horror and hidden secrets, the scrapyard had become a symbol of what Millfield had endured and overcome. Standing amidst the rusted remnants, she felt the weight of the past, but also the promise of the future. The community had transformed its pain into purpose, using memory as a catalyst for change. Support networks were established for families affected by missing persons cases, providing resources and a voice for those often left unheard. Law enforcement agencies across the region improved coordination and response strategies, informed by the lessons of the Jenkins investigation. For the Jenkins family, the memorial offered a bittersweet sense of closure. Susan Jenkins, though forever marked by loss, found comfort in knowing that Tommy's story had sparked a movement towards safety and awareness. The field where the memorial stood was a testament to the enduring love of a mother and a community's refusal to forget. As the sun set over Millfield on the anniversary of Tommy's disappearance, the town gathered at the memorial for a candlelight vigil. Families held hands, shared stories, and lit candles that flickered against the twilight. The air was filled with whispered prayers and quiet songs, a collective promise to protect the innocent and to carry the memories of the lost forward. Detective Morgan stood among them, feeling a profound sense of peace. The path had been long and arduous, marked by darkness and despair, but also by courage and hope. She knew that while the wounds might never fully heal, the legacy of those lost would endure, inspiring vigilance and compassion for generations to come. In the glow of the candles, Morgan reflected on the journey, from a missing boy at a county fair to the unraveling of a sinister network, through trials, grief, and ultimately, restoration. The case had revealed the depths of human cruelty, but also the strength of community and the unyielding pursuit of justice. As the vigil ended and the crowd dispersed, a gentle breeze swept across the memorial field, carrying with it the memories of Tommy Jenkins and the promise that no child would be forgotten. The town of Millfield, forever changed, stood united, a beacon of resilience in the face of darkness, ready to face the future with courage, compassion, and hope.